Hey everyone, another prospect podcast, Geoff, Pontes, JJ Cooper. And we're here today. We're basically almost a quarter of the way through the minor league season. I always love to talk when I talk to minor league operators because I cover the business side of the minors as well. One of the things that stands out with that is this Memorial Day is kind of when you really start, kind of marks the start of summer when it comes to drawing fans to the minor league parks. Like, not that there aren't, we've been to many games. I've been to many games already this year, but for families, for the more casual fans, Memorial Day, which leads into 4th of July, that's kind of your heyday of when you really pack in the fans at the minor league parks. But the other thing with that is you get to the end of May, the cold weather's long gone. We can no longer say, oh, so-and-so had a rough start for the first week of the season, the first couple of weeks. All these things kind of change to where you have to now say, okay, we're now starting to be enough in to start noticing some trends. That's what we want to talk about today. What have we learned in the first nearly quarter of the season on the minor league side? And we're going to look at it kind of a little bit broader. We've been talking pretty drilled down on prospects in the last couple of weeks with the Top 100 Prospects podcast. We talked about, check those out if you haven't already. We have one where we just spent basically a full time with Geoff, Josh, and I, all talking about Jesus Made, Sebastian Walcott, and Leah DeVries. And then we also did one where we kind of looked bigger picture at the full top 100. So those are there. Today, we're going to look at it a little bit more from the organization side and kind of asking, okay, so what are we noticing? What have we learned prospect-wise so far? And Geoff, I'm going to kind of start with one that I think that has kind of jumped out a little bit to both of us, which is, I think we both think that at the minor league side, I know the Twins have just finished a 13-game winning streak at the big league level, but also on top of that, I think we've been impressed. Both of them have been impressed with what they're doing on the minor league side, and we say that even though number one prospect Walker Jenkins has basically lost another several months to an ankle injury. Emmanuel Rodriguez, who's one of the their top 100 prospects, has not been great in AAA so far. Luke Keeschel made it to the big leagues, but is also on the IL. So we have this kind of but with them, which is their top prospects have either struggled or been hurt. But even with that, I feel like that there's a lot here that's kind of jumping out to us.
Yeah, I think this team and organization at the major league level, and I think coming into the season in the minors when looking at the farm system, was like very much at a crossroads, just in terms of, all right, like, is this a good major league roster? They weren't great last year. They really faltered down the stretch. They sort of have this hodgepodge of parts, particularly in the infield. And I felt this way for years with the Twins, where like nobody really fits into like a full-time role besides Carlos Correa, who is just constantly hurt and is back on the IL actually right now again. And they looked at the farm system, and there were some good pieces, but I think you could look like all throughout their top 10, and there was sort of either a glaring hole or a major question mark attached with each of those players. And not all of those questions have been answered, but I think some of them have. There's been good performances from a few prospects from outside their top 10. We talked about the winning streak they've been on at the major league level and sort of the performance there after somewhat of a rough and rocky start. So I think the momentum is headed in the right direction, but certainly in terms of the farm system, I tune into, a variety of minor league games on a night-to-night basis. And at this point,
you say variety. I'm going to say plethora, because it's plethora. Like you tune into 15 to 20 on a normal
plethora. Night. Yes, there you go. It's a great word, and one of the great scenes from The Three Amigos, actually. One of my throwback favorite movies. But back on topic, I think that you do sort of look at their squads at every level, whether it's Fort Myers, whether it's Cedar Rapids, whether it's Wichita or St. Paul, and there's always interesting pitchers going, it seems. And there's at least a hitter or two of interest that, could have either, a very long, fruitful major league career or be just an interesting player like a Carson McCusker who, on any given night could put 3 balls in play at 110 plus. So there's just a lot going on. And I think we talked about this before the show. We kind of talked about these subjects. There's just a lot of variety. There's a lot of variety among the types of pitchers in their system, the backgrounds, and I feel like it's very similar on the positional side as well. So it's a really interesting farm system, and I kind of felt the opposite coming into the season, where I thought this was a bottom half sort of farm system with a lot of like at max 50 sort of grade guys, and then two sort of shining stars at the top.
I don't know you could describe. Okay, I was going to say 2 more disparate hitting prospects than Carson McCusker and Kyle DeBarge, who are very interesting. One is 6'5" and hit ball real hard, not great defensively, strikes out a good bit. Like it's kind of an all or nothing approach. And then DeBarge is kind of like this. I would kind of like the mini Luke Keeschel, where it's like defensive versatility. There's some athleticism here. You're going to get on base, going to hit for average, all these kind of things. But then I realized, no, Carson McCusker and Peyton Eales have played on the same team together, and that's more. Another one of the guys who's been hurt for them, but that's more of the disparity because you have one of the tallest guys playing in the majors right now, and then one of the shortest guys to play in the minors in quite a while. Very different games. McCusker is a funny one because I've talked to some people about him, who are interested in the Twins, and this is where I would say that what we do is challenging because we want to be as accurate as we can on these things, and we try to report this really, intensely. We watch a lot of games. We talk to a lot of people, all this. And if you said, what is Carson McCusker going to do in the big leagues for the Twins? I would say that he's probably going to have 30, 40 at-bats maybe, where either, before Byron Buxton comes off the IL from the concussion list, or there's another move that needs to be made or whatever. And when you are talking about someone who has massive power, but that's really the only big plus tool in his game, right? He's not great defensively, doesn't really run, he's not like a big hitting for average hitter. He's 6 foot, he's massive, he's got to have a big strike zone. The range of outcomes are he could have a week like what we just saw Will Benson do, where Will Benson basically said, hello, Reds, hop on my back. I will carry you to a sweep of the Guardians, my former team, because he would, just that good. Or he could also go 0 for 15 with 8 strikeouts. And you could say, why is this McCusker guy up? And both of those, I would say, we're talking about slicing very small samples. Both of those are realistic with a guy like that. This is not Luke Keeschel who's going to come up and it's like, oh, I feel very comfortable in saying that Luke Keeschel's just going to hit for average because that's what he does everywhere. This dude really can hit. This is kind of going to be much more, like a McCusker is a guy who it's great. Like one of the reasons that the Twins have had success at the big league level is getting these kind of performances out of more role players like a Cody Clemens or, I think you could even throw Ty France into that. But when I look at this farm system, you said like there's a wide array of kind of guys here. It does jump out. There's a piece we have up at Baseball America right now about which organizations are having the best seasons, in the minors, hitting and pitching. It does jump out to me. Like if you look at their overall organization stats, the Twins are 5th in the, among all orgs in batting average, 3rd in on base, 3rd in slugging, 4th in home runs a game, 7th in walk percentage, and 4th best in strikeout percentage. Those are really good numbers. And the key thing about this is not a team that plays in hitters' parks in hitters' leagues, right? This is not the Rockies should be pretty good in these because they're going to play in Asheville and then they're going to play, in the PCL and the offensive side of it and all this. This is an organization that is producing, and that's kind of something that really does kind of jump out. So keeping on the positive side here, we're going to stay a little bit more positive. We will have some negatives here, but another one that jumps out, I would say more from the pitching side but some hitters too. But what have you liked about the Mets so far this year, Geoff?
Yeah, I think just overall in the system, there's been a lot of good performances. certainly we know about some of the hitters. I feel like we're writing about, Jacob Reimer or AJ Ewing on like a weekly basis. It feels like at this point, both guys that have had really great starts to the season. Wrote about Eli Serrano last week, was another great pick, or Eli Serrano the third. Excuse me. I want to make sure that I make sure it's the correct Eli Serrano. And then you look at the pitching and, sort of what's been done in that organization, bringing in some folks that, had track records with other organizations and, just a ton of strength in terms of the pitching development side. You've just consistently seen them over the last few drafts. It wasn't just 2024. I think it dates back the last 2 or 3, as long as this front office has kind of been together. They've done a really good job of having sort of that connection or line of communication or, collective understanding between player development and, those that are identifying players and ultimately making the decisions on who they're going to draft. And the results have just been phenomenal. And I think we've seen guys in the upper levels like Jonah Tong, Brandon Sproat, maybe not as much this year, though he started to turn a corner a little bit of recently. But certainly in previous years, Christian Scott. And now we're seeing sort of that next wave of pitching prospects coming through St. Lucie and Brooklyn. And there's some interesting arms there. So I think just overall, the Mets have really just sort of upped the quality of their organization, I think, across the board. And, it's starting to sort of yield some of those results. Even some of the guys that we had forgotten about in the Mets system, this is kind of going back to the hitting side. Drew Gilbert's having arguably his best season as a professional so far. The way the underlying data looks at AAA, he looks like a guy that's ready for some big league time and maybe extended run, maybe not with that team, but somebody. And then I think you look at Jet Williams and, after sort of getting over, I think it was a wrist injury last season, he kind of looks back and we're starting to see that sort of dynamic hair on fire style of play from Williams that we saw a few years ago. So I think just across the board, that's another system that's really, really interesting when you look at all 4 levels. And, obviously I don't have a great feel for the complex level, but I'm sure there's probably some stuff down there too.
So one of the things that does jump out with them that you kind of alluded to there is like there are multiple guys at multiple levels for them who kind of, keep kind of proving it. Like Jonah Tong, he's fascinating to me because he's kind of doing it in a very different way than we're like, if we are talking about the trend right now is that the arm slots keep going, more and more towards kind of the sidearm. Is there anyone in the minors that comes to mind? You watch, I feel like everyone every week. I can't think of anyone I watch who's more over the top than Jonah Tong. Like it is extreme over the top. And it works for him, like it's
Savage, maybe.
Yeah, that would be the other one. Yeah. But I mean, Tong is really over the top and gets it to play at the top zone. And I do think as one of my overarching things, we saw this with the rise of the 4-seamer and now the return of the sinker and all this, right? If everyone is doing something in pitching, hitters develop antibodies to it, right? Because in pitching, what you're really trying to do when we talk about all these things we talk about, IVB and VAA and, like movement patterns of pitches and all that. The goal of all of it is be unusual, be different, right? Because the way visual processing works, you only have a very short period of time and you're not going to follow the ball as a hitter all the way to the plate. So you're trying to kind of throw it in a bucket. Like I've seen this before. If the pitch is there at this point, I start swinging and it's going to meet my bat here. And the more you can be utterly unusual, the more you can be something that a hitter has not seen or is not seeing very often, the better you are. Jonah Tong's, I would say, pretty unusual. You mentioned also there are some hitters here, but again, going back to the piece we had today, as we record this at Baseball America, The thing that stands out to me, probably most importantly, the Mets are top 10 in most pitching categories. They do have a couple of really nice places to pitch. Brooklyn, I would say Brooklyn is a good place for pitchers and not hitters. But stat that really jumps out: best of all 30 organizations as far as strikeout percentage, and more importantly, best in strikeout percentage minus walk percentage. A pretty useful stat. They are best in that across all organizations. That's something that you love to see if you're an organization, is that your pitchers are striking out having the best rate of strikeouts compared to walks of anyone in Major League Baseball, as far as all 30 organizations, as far as their full season clubs. That's something that very much stands out. Another one that I did not expect for us to be talking about coming into the season, and I don't want to go overboard here, because if you look at the A's right now, this is not an organization that is overflowing with top 100 prospects. Jacob Wilson has graduated. Nick Kurtz, who's had some struggles in the big leagues, I'll give him a little bit of a pass on that. He's, at this time last year, he was still playing college ball. But after that, there's not really a lot of top 100 prospects. Colby Thomas was on it. He's now dropped off. But when you look across the minor leagues with them, I would say that the depth of talent, which I really would say there was a stretch there not that many years ago where you looked at it and said, man, there's a lot of guys who are having bad years. There are a lot of guys who I don't know where this is going. There's a lot more going in the right direction right now. And I would say it's just kind of, more than anything, it's kind of more than any like one player, it's more the consistency of it that I would say that does jump out. But I would say that, Henry Bolte, we talk about, is one who's got, Tommy White before he, I know he had an injury, but Tommy White was someone who I would say has raised his stock a little bit further. Not going to be a third baseman. I think we can comfortably say that, but Tommy White has hit as we would expect that he would hit. Denzel Clark, I think, is still kind of got, is interesting to some extent. And then I'll put it on a tee for you. I think that we were watching him again today. I was watching him face Sebastian Walcott, which was fun. But Gage Jump, is one of the pitchers for the A's who really does jump out so far.
Yeah, and he's a guy that I've been a fan of really since he was a potential pick out of high school. Had sort of a rocky start at UCLA, was kind of in the rotation, the bullpen, then got injured, missed some time, resurfaces at LSU, has a solid season, ends up with the A's. And I had him as a potential offseason sleeper. He was one of my, sort of 20 pitchers to watch in 2020, that 2025 that could break out. And so far, so good. He's been excellent now through 2 starts in the Texas League. Went 6 innings today with 4 hits, 2 walks, 8 Ks. It's 83 pitches, so I suppose he could come back out for the 7th inning, but I'm going to doubt that they necessarily do that. But you never know. You could see. But consistently, Jump has gotten deep into his starts. He's thrown a lot of strikes. He's generated swinging strikes. The secondaries have looked improved from what we saw as an amateur. The fastball's kind of always been pretty good, just because he gets down the mound and is able to create a lower release height because he's a little bit shorter of a pitcher, and still have somewhat of a vertical arm action, which allows him to create rides. So it's a good mix of traits in terms of good left-handed velocity, and he's been holding it this season sort of in the mid-90s. Movement, release traits. I know we've talked about that in previous shows, and just kind of checking all 3 boxes. And so far, so good for Jump. It's been one of the better performances in the minors to start the season. I don't want to say one of the better pitching prospects because I don't think he's there yet. But I do think he's a guy that was way outside top 100 conversations coming into the year. We now stand here on May 20th recording, and it does feel like our next top 100 conversation Gage Jump will come up in a more serious manner than he came up in the last, where he was sort of mentioned in passing as like a next type of name on, where I think him and then, the aforementioned Jonah Tong during our Mets segment are two guys that could potentially jump onto the list among the pitching prospects that are off right now that aren't performing.
So, okay, we've been positive. Again, we want to be fair. We want to be accurate. We want to try to get some of the good and the bad here. On the flip side of that, I would say that it's not been a fun year. Obviously in Baltimore, like the Orioles at the big league level are easily, I would say, the most surprising, disappointing team so far. I would say, though, also on the minor league side, you've noticed it. We've talked about it off air a good bit, that where Samuel Basallo is one of the best prospects in baseball. He's must-watch TV. But as two people who watch a lot of MiLB TV and try to keep track of what's going on, you kind of made the point to me that, like, when you watch Orioles minor league games, there are some pitchers that are interesting, but not a whole lot of hitters who are like, oh, okay, I need to make sure that I'm bearing down for this guy because there's something I really need to watch here.
That's how it feels right now. There's just not a lot like in years past, and even last year kind of counts because you had Jackson Holiday and Kobe Mayo at the beginning of the season, some of those guys. In years past, you were tuning into Orioles minor league games to see the positional prospects. There might be an interesting pitcher that was kind of off the radar, but they spent so little draft capital on pitching that you kind of rarely saw that. And I feel like we've transitioned now to this period where outside of Samuel Basallo, and, if you wanted to still include Kobe Mayo in that conversation as well, fine. Though it's obviously, not been great at the major league level. But that's a whole other conversation I'm sure we'll get into. A lot of these guys, Vance Honeycutt, Enrique Bradfield, Dylan Beavers, Judd Fabian, Griffin O'Farrell, they don't really, at least for me, they don't really move the needle. I'm much more interested in seeing, Ferret, Herman, Braxton Bragg, who we've talked about a lot. I'm much more interested on the pitching side and tuning in for that right now. And that's not great because it's not like they have a Grayson Rodriguez or someone like that at this point. It's more that sort of third tier of pitching prospect where you're like, maybe this guy's a 50 or better, but we got to figure that out. Sort of in that point. So I don't think it says a whole lot about a lot of their first round picks. And we can't just say that, picking at the top of the draft, you have access to certain players. That's certainly true. We see the Mariners, we see the Dodgers, we see, a lot of teams that draft toward the back of the first round consistently still land a lot of good picks. There's a lot of good players in rounds, the first, the supplemental first round, competitive balance, the second round into the third. There's still a lot of good prospects that come out of there. It's a matter of identifying and drafting and signing them. That hasn't really been the case so far with the Orioles over the last couple of years. And I think it's starting to show.
I would say also that they also have had some injuries. Enrique Bradfield's been hurt. But I would say that, again, with a lot of these pretty high draft college outfielders that they take in, they look like guys who will be big leaguers, but there's really not many, or not really, I would say almost any of these have really popped where you go, okay, that guy has hit his way into top 100 consideration, where, again, you go back to, yes, they did draft at the top of the draft. That's where Adley, that's where Jackson Holiday came from. But there also were, Gunnar Henderson got money, but that was a guy who was available for everyone. That was a development success story. Kobe Mayo was a development success story. Now, again, I think that he's going a little stale. This is the problem when you have a lot of guys is getting someone regular at bats. I don't want to also ignore, kind of keeping it in that area, Nationals getting ready to pick. We know that the Nationals are kind of getting ready for the draft. They have had some success stories at the big league level. James Wood does look like a kind of a cornerstone guy for years to come. But I would say that, again, this is more looking at overall organizational minor league depth than it is one or two guys. You can absolutely, I think that we can 100% say if you said, okay, are there success stories in the Nationals farm system this year at the minor league level? You can say it with every organization, but I would say, yeah, I would say that we could say, that Dalen Lyle has looked, pretty good so far this year. You could go kind of further down and you say, okay, it's not just guys, knocking on the door. I think you could absolutely say that Luke Dickerson is another, very positive name to highlight. Premium draft pick for them, got money. So far, so good. Looks very intriguing. But if you look at the organization overall, again, just looking at this piece that we did today, we kind of acknowledge you can be, if you play in hitters parks, you can do better in hitter stats for these than you would, on a neutralized basis. If you're in pitchers parks, you can do better, than in pitching stats. If you're bad in everything, hitting and pitching, that's a really bad sign. And, I bring this up. The Orioles, like if you look at the Orioles hitting ranks to kind of tie these two together, the Orioles are bottom 10 of all organizations in pretty much all the major hitting stats that we looked at, other than walk rate. The Nationals are dead last in on-base percentage among all 30 organizations, dead last in walk rate. And when I say dead last in walk rate, there are only two teams who have a sub 10% walk rate for their minor league hitters, them and the Pirates. And I would say that that's a stat that does jump out. Like that's a point of emphasis. That's a coaching part of this, where a development part. I'm not saying walks are everything, but those two teams being sub 10% is something that is a little bit concerning. But when you say that, okay, the Nationals are top third in stolen base attempt game, successful stolen bases. On the pitching side, they are 25th or worst in almost every pitching category they are 25th or worst in every pitching category other than home runs allowed among the ones we looked at. Strike percentage, walk rate, strikeout rate, ERA, runs allowed, all these things. If you're bad at hitting stats and pitching stats, that's not a great sign. You look at the Nationals, and I would say that, the overall depth of talent still for them. I'll kind of kick it back to you, Geoff. Like when you are watching games, they've had some injuries, as Susanna, Sakura's just coming back, that's a key part of this. Again, not everyone has everyone healthy. Most teams don't have everyone healthy. But I don't feel like that there's a lot of nights that I'm like, oh, I've got to check out this Wilmington game, or, oh, I got to check out Fredericksburg, or take your pick of whoever, because there's just not a lot of guys in the lineup where you're like, I've got to see this tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the games that I've watched against Wilmington this season have been like the Hudson Valley series or Brooklyn or whoever. I've seen a decent amount of them, but outside of Alex Clemmy, there's not a whole lot that you're super excited about there. As you mentioned, Sakura's coming back as Susanna gets hurt. So, you sort of trade off there in terms of interesting players. Cruz is now graduated and at the major league level, so you're not checking in on him. Seaver King has really underperformed. They do have Cavalli back, who's been pitching in AAA. So I have tuned in to some of those starts, but I really think Lyle and Dickerson are kind of the prime names right now that you're going to be following. I wouldn't say in the lower levels because Lyle was AA, but of up and coming names that probably won't debut this year, but could be moving up that list. But it's another one of these organizations where I think on the fringes, things haven't really been great. They haven't utilized 4th and 5th round picks to target college starters that have turned into, potential major league pieces. You haven't seen a lot of that. You haven't seen, them targeting, a high upside prep guy outside of like day one with extra bonus money and sort of pulling him down and doing something there. You just, especially on the position side, you just haven't seen it. Elijah Green, still looks like he's
K-rate.
He is trending further and further, or closer and closer, I'll say, to probably just non-prospect status until further notice, until some changes are made. And, I think that's all part of this. Some of the big international guys like Vaccaro, et cetera, haven't been phenomenal. So there's sort of a lot to critique here. They need some more fresh blood, and they need some guys to step up and perform, because we really haven't seen that, outside of like a Brad Lord or someone like that. There hasn't been a lot of sort of pop-up interesting stories in this national system to follow the last few years.
But so that's our kind of look at what organizations, kind of what we've learned so far this season. And as we always do before we wrap up, we do like to do we went away for the last couple of weeks because we were doing top 100 podcasts, but the prospect soapboxes. And that's where normally we spotlight a player outside of the top 100. I'm going to do it a little different today. Just one other organization I want to highlight a little bit here, and kind of also provide an apology, a mea culpa. At the time that the Trevor Rogers trade last year, I kind of saw like, okay, this could work out both ways, because the Orioles needed pitching depth, and Kyle Stowers, obviously I didn't think was going to get a whole lot of at bats for the O's. But I want to say, like, bigger picture with that, I was wrong on that trade. Like, obviously the Marlins are very much winning that trade, but I would say kind of bigger picture on that. I do start to see, I'm seeing a little bit. This does not mean that, the Marlins need to start planning a parade for 2027 or 28, but I do see a little bit of what they're doing here, in that this is coming into the year, this was a bad big league team. We knew it was not going to be very good. And you could really argue that the roughest thing is Sandy Alcantara's come back and he hasn't been very good. And kind of one of the things that the Marlins need is for Sandy to be good, so that he can become, hey, we have this ace who has another 2 years of team control, and we're going to get a boatload of prospects for him. Can't trade him right now. You want him to have a period of dominance before you trade him, and he's been dominated, not dominating so far. But that said, at-bats are cheap in Miami right now. And so they've been able to say to Kyle Stowers, where in Baltimore it would be like, hey, here are 10 at-bats spread over the week. Make the best of them. And by the way, if you didn't have a good 10 this week, we probably are going to give 10 to Kierstad or 10 to Kauser or 10 to Mull. Like, there were so many mouths to feed there that there was never going to be a time where Kyle Stowers was just handed a job and said, this is your job for the first 2 months of the season. Go do something with it. He's done that in Miami. He has 10 home runs. Dane Myers. I think of Dane Myers like my best case scenario for Dane Myers projection wise was he could be a fourth outfielder. They have at-bats. They've given to him 337, 375, 482 in 88 plate appearances as we speak, playing all three outfield spots. Now, I will say, well, really, sorry, not all three, center and right. I will say, if I was the Marlins, I would be calling up the Padres and saying, hey, you have an opening in your outfield. We have a Dane Myers. We would be happy to trade him. And you should value him in the way that he has produced so far. I would be selling high. But what I'm saying, though, is that is finding value from a player. They're doing this. Liam Hicks is being so far one of the most productive Rule 5 catchers we've ever seen. They're doing this over and over, where I'm not saying every one of them's hitting, but Xavier Edwards, when they brought Xavier Edwards over from the Rays, the way I would put this big picture is they are happy to buy. Okay, hang with me, Geoff, on this analogy. Hang with me, listeners and viewers. They're looking in the bakery. They're looking at the day old stuff, right? It's not spoiled. It's not something that you're having to throw it out. But they've time and time again, they're acquiring prospects who are available in part because for all their good attributes, we've also seen their kind of some of the worst. Like, it's their prospect status often is a little bit stale, right? Xavier Edwards, the Rays were like, he's not going to fit in our long-term plans. Maybe he should have, but he was not going to fit in their long-term plans. Kyle Stowers, the Orioles had looked around and said, we have other outfielders who are ahead of him in the pecking order. He's available. Connor Norby, Devison De Los Santos, who they acquired from the D-backs. Augustin Ramirez, who they acquired from the Yankees. We could go through a long list of these guys, and not all of them are going to hit. Not all of them have hit. But I will say, like, one of the ways that you can derive and develop value is when you have these players who you can give multiple of these players enough runway, enough time to kind of play through some of their struggles and not be like something where you're looking over your back and saying, if I have a bad week, I'm done. Kyle Stowers, for the first time probably as a pro, knew in April, like, if I have a bad week, I'm still going to be out there next week, right? Jesus, like, they've been doing this for a while. Jesus Sanchez, another guy who fits kind of this category. But that's my soapbox for this week is I am not saying plan a parade in Miami anytime soon, but I am saying it does jump out to me that this is, I can see some positive. And by the way, got a story coming hopefully next week about a pretty stunning stat about the Marlins at the minor league level that I'm looking forward to, that we maybe will talk about on a future prospect podcast. So, Geoff, who is your soapbox today?
There was a big market tease on that Marlins statistical story, but like that, interested to dig into that and learn a little bit more. But my prospect soapbox this week, I'm going to stick to a single player, Mike Sirota. As of this moment of writing this, I believe Sirota leads all qualified hitters in minor league baseball in WRC plus with a whopping 216. Majority of that is at the low A level. He's only had 3 games in high A thus far. Have been 3 very productive games, but 3 games so far. I think Sirota is just a really sort of interesting study. He was initially drafted out of high school in 2021 by the Dodgers, doesn't sign, ends up on campus at Northeastern, has 2 really phenomenal years as an underclassman there with the Huskies, goes to the Cape. I think might have been a USA tryout guy as well, if I'm not mistaken, and then really bottoms out in the beginning of his junior season, ends up sliding into the 3rd round of the Mets. They sign him for just a little bit under $1 million. Doesn't even play a game within the Cincinnati organization, and the Dodgers come calling once again. They acquire him in a trade. He debuts. The numbers look really, really good so far. The underlying data is really good. And, internally in our Slack chat, Ben Badler had asked yesterday sort of what changed about him. And I dug in a little bit, looked at some swings, obviously looked at the data as well. And I think what we're starting to see is he's showing the ability to hit the ball in the air and make hard contact, 95 plus mile per hour contact consistently, to his pull side in the air, and it's leading to even better results. He's always had outlier, and I really do mean outlier swing decisions. It's like a 13% chase rate. He never chases. It's right in line what we saw in college, though he played against sort of lower mid major competition. And now we're seeing the power to go with it. It is the Cal League majority. He does have 2 home runs in high A in 3 games. So I guess we could say it's showing in the Midwest League as well. But 9 home runs over 27 games. As I said, the underlying exit velocity data was always really good. It's up even more now. And we're starting to see it sort of materialize with the better angles into more barrels. And I think anybody who's followed Major League Baseball over the last 4 to 5 seasons understands what that is, or even just has hit a baseball understands what the value of that is. Just consistently hitting the ball hard at good angles. He's making flush quality contact over and over and over again. It's like a 94 mile per hour average EV at this point. It's a plus 90th percentile. I think he's had, a few balls over 110 this year. And like I said, the launch angles consistently are really good. It's like 14 to 16 degrees, whether you're looking at his hard hinge launch angles, his average, his pull side launch angles. It's just been really consistent across the board. And what we've seen is that air pull percentage jump from 13% last year to over 24, upwards of 25% this year. And the results have followed. So it's interesting because he has this baseline of skills beyond the newfound power and sort of pull side pop. He's always been a good runner and a good athlete. He's wiry and, has sort of a center field sort of profile. He has, above average bat to ball skills, in my opinion, maybe average at worst. And then plus swing decisions, maybe better. So I think when you put all of those ingredients together for a really interesting player.
That's again, that's one where I do love you had to keep caveating. Only 3 games in Midwest League, 2 homers. He's been very loud, although everyone for that Great Lakes team, I feel like it's like every day it's like, okay, so who's going to be the star today? One day it's Sirota hitting homers. Another day it's Kendall George stealing 6 bags in one game, tying a Midwest League record. Another day it's Zahir Hope. Another day it's Jose DePaula. It's just player after player there. One of the most interesting teams in the minors, as we've said. But that's another Baseball America Prospect podcast. We do hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for subscribing, whether through your podcast feed or through YouTube. Post these every Wednesday. And we'll have another one next week. But again, if you have comments, leave them on the YouTube channel or send them to us at podcast@baseballamerica.com. And we'll also try to answer questions as we can. For Geoff, I'm JJ. So long, everybody.